The sun burned low over the dusty plains of Red Rock territory, painting the sky in bleeding shades of orange and ash as the wooden auction platform creaked under the weight of greed, cruelty, and desperate men, while the crowd gathered like vultures circling a wounded animal, their boots sinking into dirt soaked with sweat, tears, and forgotten hopes, and among them stood a young woman named Eliza, her back bent, her arms trembling, her clothes torn and stained with blood and dust, her newborn child wrapped in a thin cloth barely shielding him from the evening chill, only hours after she had given birth in the corner of a livestock barn like she was nothing more than another piece of property, another breeding mare in human skin, her breath shallow, her body still burning with pain as she tried to shield her crying infant from the staring eyes and cruel laughter of men who saw her not as a mother but as merchandise. And the auctioneer's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Strong stock. Young. Still usable. Fresh labor, and the words cut into her heart deeper than any blade ever could, because in that moment she realized they didn't even see her baby as a life, only as a future worker, another number on a ranch ledger, another pair of hands in a world that fed on broken backs, and as bids began flying like bullets, their voices sharp and loud, Eliza's mind drifted not to fear but to memories of soft laughter, green fields she once walked through barefoot, a father who used to lift her onto his shoulders and tell her she was born free like the wind, and for a moment she felt shame burning harder than her pain because how had a girl born under open skies ended up being sold next to cattle, but just as another man spat and called out a higher price, there came a sudden silence, heavy, unnatural, like the land itself was holding its breath, and a horse's hooves echoed slow and steady as a lone cowboy rode through the crowd, not rich like the ranch owners, not polished like the town sheriffs, but worn like the land, his hat low, his coat dusty, his eyes carrying storms no one dared to question, and some whispered his name, others avoided his gaze, because this was Caleb Hart, the man who had once walked away from blood money, the cowboy who refused to bow, and as he dismounted, the floorboards groaned, the auctioneer hesitated, the crowd shifted, because even devils sense when a storm is coming, and Caleb's gaze locked onto Eliza, not with hunger, not with ownership, but with something dangerous, humanity, and for a moment the world disappeared for him, because he didn't see a product, he saw his mother's eyes, he saw the countless graves this land had hidden, he saw injustice standing breathing before him, and the auctioneer stammered, "You here to buy, Hart?" trying to sound strong while his hands shook, and Caleb stepped forward, every boot step echoing like a heartbeat across the silent yard, and his voice cut the dust like thunder as he said, "No man should own another, and no woman should be sold like a horse after giving life," and murmurs rippled through the crowd like wildfire, some men laughed, some scowled, because challenging the system was like challenging gravity, but Caleb reached into his coat, not dramatically, not proudly, but like a man pulling out his own soul, and he placed a heavy pouch of coins onto the table with a sound so solid it made even the auction hammer pause mid-air, and the metal clink echoed louder than all the earlier bids combined, and every head turned, every breath hitched, as he looked straight at the crowd and said words that would ripple through Red Rock for generations, "I'm buying her freedom," and for one heartbeat the world froze, because money was meant to buy land, cattle, power, not liberty, not dignity, not humanity, and the auctioneer swallowed hard, counting the coins while the ranchers gritted their teeth, seeing not profit but rebellion, and Eliza just stood trembling, her mind unable to process it, thinking she'd collapse or the ground would open or this was some cruel joke, but then the chain around her wrist was unlocked, the iron falling to the ground with a sharp metallic crack, and when Caleb's hand gently removed the tag from her neck, she felt like air filled her lungs for the first time, like her heart remembered how to beat, like life hadn't abandoned her after all, and Caleb whispered low, only for her to hear, "You don't owe me anything, you just owe that child a free life." And as the crowd watched a system crack in front of them, a few men clenched their fists, some women wiped silent tears, and the wind carried away the echo of that moment, because freedom is louder than chains when someone finally dares to speak it aloud, and if you feel the fire of this moment burning inside you right now, don't let it fade, subscribe to this channel and walk with us through stories of courage, justice, and the untamed West, because this was only the beginning of Eliza's journey, and the storm Caleb Hart had just awakened was far from over. The road out of Red Rock stretched like a scar across the earth, dry, endless, and cruel to those who walked it alone, but Eliza wasn't alone anymore, because beside her rode Caleb, not as a savior in shining armor but as a man who had simply refused to look away, and as her newborn slept against her chest, his tiny fingers curled around her cloth like he understood the world almost took him before it even gave him a chance. And although freedom had been bought, danger had only just begun. Because the same men who spat on her now watched her leave with bitterness in their eyes, their pride wounded more than their pockets, and in towns like Red Rock, wounded pride always bled into revenge, and whispers followed them like dust trails, saying Caleb had insulted powerful ranchers, that he had made an example out of men who controlled land, law, and bullets, and Eliza heard every rumor with quiet terror, but Caleb only rode forward, knowing storms only grow louder when you try to outrun them, and as night swallowed the plains, they made camp beneath a sky throne full of stars like scattered silver, and for the first time since her child's birth she cried silently, not from pain but from the weight of fear lifting just enough for her emotions to crash, and Caleb didn't touch her, didn't offer easy comfort, he only placed a blanket over her shoulders and said, "The world doesn't end at the market block," and those simple words became her anchor, her proof that humanity still existed beyond cruelty. And as days passed on the road, he taught her to read the land, to follow river bends, to see which clouds meant rain and which meant trouble, treating her not like a rescued animal but like someone rebuilding a soul. And yet freedom had a cost, because on the fourth night they were found, not by law, not by justice, but by 3 riders from Red Rock whose eyes carried the hunger of men who'd lost control, and they blocked the path with rifles low and smiles high, saying Caleb didn't own her, that he'd just embarrassed the wrong people, that freedom could be returned like a faulty product, but something in Eliza, the same fire that survived chains and childbirth on dirt floors, rose up like a desert storm, and before Caleb could even speak she stepped forward, holding her child close, her voice trembling but fierce, and she said, "You don't lose power when you let go of injustice, you lose power when you cling to it." And the men froze, not because of fear, but because they'd never heard a woman sold like cattle speak like she still believed in dignity, and Caleb's eyes flickered with pride, not possession, but respect, and guns didn't fire that night, not because men grew kind, but because sometimes courage pulls its own kind of trigger, and they rode away, humiliated, and the silence after felt like victory, like breath returning after near drowning. And weeks later they reached a small border town where slavery had been outlawed years before and where names didn't matter as much as survival, and Eliza stepped off the horse, feeling the earth beneath her feet without chains for the first time in her adult life, and she didn't feel like a victim, she felt like the beginning of something untamed, and Caleb tipped his hat and said he wouldn't stay, because freedom learned must be walked alone, and she watched him disappear into the horizon like the last shadow of a painful chapter closing, and as she held her son and felt his steady heartbeat against hers, she understood something deeper than sorrow, that freedom isn't just given, it's carried, protected, taught, and rebuilt with every sunrise. And if this story of broken chains and unbroken will speaks to your heart, then join our journey, subscribe to this channel, because more stories like this are coming, stories of justice rising from dust, of courage standing against cruelty, of ordinary souls doing extraordinary things when the world tries to strip them of their humanity.